In the last episode, we discussed the expedition of Ibn Fadlan, who was an Arab traveler and chronicler who was sent from the Abbasid Empire to the Volga Bulgars to convert them to Islam. Now we shall return to the history of the Rus and their invasion of the Khazar Khaganate. The western border of the Khazar state was protected by their control of the town of Kiev, but after Kiev was conquered by the Rus, it was up to the Magyars to play the role of protecting the western wall of Khazaria. But eventually, the Magyars were driven west by the Pechenegs. This vacancy on the western region of the Khazar state would eventually lead to its demise. Around the same time that Ibn Fadlan's expedition took place, a 10th century Arab historian and geographer, al-Masudi, tells us that the Rus, with 500 ships, each manned by 100 persons, approached the territory of the Khazars and sent a letter to the Jewish warriors requesting to be allowed to pass through their country and into the Khazar Sea, that is, the Caspian Sea. The Rus promised the Khazars that they would give them half of what they took in plunder from the people off the coast of the sea. The Rus were granted permission and descended the Volga River and came out on the side where it meets the Khazar Sea, which is here. Here the Rus spread out across the sea and raided all the areas of Baku and Azerbaijan, two areas that were inhabited by Muslims. Today, 1100 years after this history, Azerbaijan is still dominated by a Muslim community and is an ally of the State of Israel. If you research the ties between these two countries, sources will tell you that their relationship began just recently in the 20th century. But viewing this map and analyzing Khazar history, we can see that Azerbaijan was a part of the Khazar Empire, and their ties go back much farther than just the 1900s. This is why Azerbaijan and Israel have such a strong relationship today. But let's get back on track. Here, the Rus plundered, destroyed women and children, and raided and burned everything in sight. We are told that the Rus also traveled a distance of 3 days inland into the city of Ardabil and attacked it, but the people there recovered and took arms against their attackers. So the Rus withdrew back to the coast near the island of Baku. But here, they were met by natives trying to stop them from escaping by dislodging them with small boats. The Rus fought back against the natives, and thousands of Muslims were killed or drowned. The Rus continued this campaign for many months, and when they were finished, they returned to the Khazars and gave them the treasure they promised. Al-Masudi tells us that a group of Muslim mercenaries living in Khazaria, who were called Arsaya, heard of the Rus incursions into the sea, and said to the king of the Khazars, "Leave us to deal with these people. They have raided the land of the Muslims, our brothers, and have shed blood and enslaved women and children." The Muslims of Khazaria then went forth to find the Rus. These Arabs traveled on land from Idle to the mouth of the Volga River. When the two armies reached each other, the Rus disembarked and drew up in battle against the Muslims. Al-Masudi tells us that among the Muslims were a number of Christians. He also says that the fighting continued for many days, and God helped the Muslims put the Rus to the sword. Some of them were killed and others were drowned. The Muslims allegedly slayed about 30,000 Rus on the banks of the Khazar River, and those who escaped were killed by the Burdas and the Bulgars. These events took place in between 912 and 913 AD. This was about 15 years after the Pechenegs attacked the Magyars, causing them to migrate west and permanently settle in present-day Hungary. 10 years after these Rus incursions, Ibn Fadlan took his expedition to the land of the Volga Bulgars to convert them to Islam and help them build a fortress to protect them from the Jews. I'm just trying to provide some context. These Rus incursions into the Khazar Sea took place under the administration of Oleg, who was the successor of Rurik. Oleg was also the one who conquered Kiev and made it the capital of the Rus state. He united the Slavic tribes under his belt and signed treaties with the Byzantines that opened up the door to lucrative trading relations. In 911 AD, Oleg died and was succeeded by Igor. Igor is said to have been the son of Rurik, even though many say that Rurik never existed, but we aren't going to worry about that right now. Igor was described by the primary Russian chronicle as a greedy, foolish, and sadistic ruler. In 941 AD, he attacked the Byzantines with a large fleet, and of the people they captured, some they butchered, and others they set up as targets and shot at. Many sacred churches were burned to the ground, but in the end, Igor and the Rus were defeated by a naval weapon the Byzantines called sea fire. but other sources call this weapon Greek fire. Sea fire was a naval weapon invented by Byzantine architects and chemists. The Byzantines defended themselves with this weapon against the Arabs and the Rus. Although many others tried to imitate the weapon, they failed. The primary Russian chronicle tells us that upon seeing the flames, the Rus cast themselves into the sea. But the survivors went home and related that the Greeks had in their possession lightning from heaven. These events took place in 941 AD, but in 944 AD, Igor organized another campaign against Byzantium. This time, the Byzantines decided to negotiate with the Rus and gave Igor a huge payout, and he returned to Kiev. According to the primary chronicle, or the Russian primary chronicle, the next year in 945 AD, Igor visited the land of the Drevlian to collect tribute. The Drevlian were an East Slavic tribe that were subject to and oppressed by the Rus. Even though Igor had already collected the tribute due by the Drevlian, he demanded they pay more. This was the last straw for the East Slavic tribe, who responded by murdering Igor. In Arthur Koestler's book, The 13th Tribe, on page 139, he tells us this. When Igor was killed in 945 AD by the Drevlians, a Slavonic people upon which he had imposed an exorbitant tribute, the widowed Olga became regent of Kiev. She started her rule by taking fourfold revenge on the Drevlians. First, a Drevlian peace mission was buried alive. Then, a delegation of notables was locked in a bathhouse and burned alive. This was followed by another massacre. And lastly, the main town of the Drevlians was burnt down. Olga's bloodlust seemed truly insatiable until her baptism. So, that was a summary of Olga's reign in Kiev. After the death of her husband Igor, their son Sviatoslav took the throne, but he was too young to reign, so his mother took his place until he became of age. She used her authority to get revenge on the Slavonic people who killed her husband Igor. According to the chronicle, she massacred thousands of Slavs with a sword and burnt their cities down. She sought to fully terminate the Drevlian as a people, but they begged for mercy. She responded to their pleas by visiting their land and setting their communities ablaze. The primary chronicle tells us this. There was not a house that was not consumed, and it was impossible to extinguish the flames because all the houses caught on fire at once. The people fled from the city, and Olga ordered her soldiers to kill them. Thus she took the city and burned it and captured the elders of the city. Some of the other captives she killed, while some she gave to others as slaves to her followers. The remnant she left to pay tribute. In 957 AD, Olga was baptized in Constantinople. She is seen as the first ruler of the Rus state to adopt Christianity, and according to the primary chronicle, she became the predecessor of Christian Russia, and despite her massacres, the chronicle still speaks of her in this manner. For she shone like the moon by night, and she was radiant among the infidels like a pearl in the mud. Her efforts to spread Christianity earned her the title Apostolos, which means equal to the apostles. In the face of all her actions, in 1547, the Russian Orthodox Church officially canonized her as Saint Olga of Kiev, and she is highly revered and admired today in Russia and Ukraine. This term saint has definitely been saturated. The definition of a saint is someone who was set apart, in other words, holy, but we aren't going to talk about that right now. Igor and Olga's son, Sviatoslav, rejected Christianity and decided to keep his pagan beliefs. He believed that converting to Christianity would make him a laughingstock to all his subjects. Despite his refusal to accept Christianity, Sviatoslav would be the last non-Christian ruler of Kiev. After he became of age, he began a series of campaigns, and his first target was the East Slavic tribe of the Sviatochi. Earlier, during the emergence of the Rus, the Sviatochi decided to continue paying tribute to the Khazars instead of the Rus. After Sviatoslav subjugated the Sviatochi, he later went on to attack and destroy the Volga-Bulgars in their capital. These campaigns are not in chronological order. They are just some of Sviatoslav's major accomplishments. But his biggest expedition took place in 965 AD against the Jewish empire of Khazar. Concerning this campaign, the primary chronicle says this. Sviatoslav went to the Oka and the Volga, and on coming in contact with the Sviatochins, he inquired of them to whom they paid tribute. They made answer that they paid a silver piece per plowshare to the Khazars. When the Khazars heard of this approach, they went out to meet him with their prince, the Khagan, and their armies came to blows. When the battle thus took place, Sviatoslav defeated the Khazars and took their city of Bieloviza. I'm pretty sure I pronounced that wrong. But anyways, this was the Slavonic name for Sarkel, the famous Khazar fortress on the Don River. So, 965 AD marks the year the Khazar state was destroyed by the Rus, formerly known as the Vikings, who later became known as the Russians. Many people mark this period as the end of the Khazars in general, but their presence on the scene, as we shall see, lasted for many more centuries after the destruction of their fortress of Sarkel. Concerning the destruction of the Khazar Empire by the Rus, Professor Arnold Toynbee has this to say. The Rus succeeded in destroying the Khazar steppe empire, but the only territory they acquired was Tamutarakan, if I pronounced that right. This was on the Taman Peninsula, facing the Crimea, and the gain was ephemeral. What Professor Toynbee means is that this partial territory of the Khazars that the Rus acquired only lasted for a short time. 5 years later, in 970 AD, Sviatoslav was defeated by the Byzantines. After this defeat, he was forced to sign a peace treaty agreeing that he would not attempt to run any more campaigns against the Byzantines again. This treaty also forced Sviatoslav to leave the Balkans. In 972 AD, while Sviatoslav was on his way back to Kiev, he was ambushed and killed by the Pechenegs, who were hired by the Byzantines. According to the primary chronicle, they cut off his head and made a cup out of his skull, overlaid it with gold, and drank from it. So after the death of Sviatoslav, a civil war broke out among his sons in 977 AD. Long story short, his youngest son, Vladimir, emerged victorious in 978 AD and proclaimed himself as the sole ruler of Kiev. 8 years later, in 986 AD, under the administration of Vladimir, a theological dispute with representatives from the four major religions took place. Anytime a king or group of people emerged victorious from war or seemed to be making a name for themselves, there was almost always an attempt to convert them to a certain religion. We've seen this pattern take place in the 8th century AD with the Khazars, under their ruler, King Bulan, the same king that was responsible for making Judaism the state religion of the Khazars. After his successful campaigns of Armenia, the nomadic Turks were beginning to make a name for themselves, and as a result, attempts were made to convert them to Christianity or Islam. The same thing seemed to be taking place with Vladimir and the Rus as they emerged on the scene as a growing world power. According to the primary Russian chronicle, the Volga Bulgars sent a Muslim expedition to convert Vladimir to Islam. The representatives of Islam explained to Vladimir the joy of paradise, and when abstinence from pork and wine was mentioned, he drew the line and said, "Drinking is the joy of the Russes, and we cannot exist without that pleasure." After this discussion came a German delegation of Roman Catholics, adherents of the Latin Rite. They mentioned to Vladimir that one of the main requirements of their faith was to fast according to one's strength. He quickly rejected and said, "Depart hence. Our fathers accepted no such principle." The third delegation consisted of Khazar Jews. Vladimir questioned the Jews and asked them why they no longer ruled Jerusalem. They responded and said, "God was angry at our forefathers and scattered them among the Gentiles on account of our sins." Vladimir responded and said, "How can you hope to teach others while you yourselves are cast out and scattered abroad by the hand of God? Do you expect us to accept that fate also?" So here we are in the year 986 AD, 240 years after the Khazars' conversion to Judaism. From this meeting, we can see that the Khazars have completely associated themselves with the curses in Deuteronomy. Not only that, but other nations around them have actually accepted the idea that these people have been cast out by God because of their sins. These people are Turks, whose ancestors came from Central Asia, descendants of Japheth, the son of Noah. We know this because this is where their history is traced back to. Not only that, but they themselves annotated how they descended from Japheth. Arab historians and chroniclers also recorded how the Khazars descended from Togarmah or Tiraz. Contemporary leading authorities in Khazar studies, like D.M. Dunlop, also supports the likelihood of the Khazars descending from Tiraz, son of Japheth. This history leads us into the next episode, where we will discuss the Khazar exodus into Eastern Europe, where they eventually became the bulk of the people who the world today calls the Jews. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next episode.